scan tool that I have does not allow us to retract that electronic parking brake, so we're gonna have to do it the manual way. Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm gonna show you how to replace your rear brake pads on a 2021 Kia Telluride. This will be the same as the Hyundai Palisade, and just take note that this does have the electronic parking brake, and I'm gonna show you how to retract this caliper piston without using a scan tool. Now, the first thing we need to do is disconnect this connector right here so that we can make sure that we are not going to mess up anything with the computer or anything like that. Make sure that the car is turned off when you do this as well. Now, the easiest way that I found to remove this clip is just to use a little pick tool like this and reach up underneath and pull out just a little bit, and it'll come right off. So we can just put that out of the way. And now we can loosen and remove these two caliper slide pin bolts here. These are 14 millimeter. Now you do want to make sure that the parking brake is off when you're doing this, but now we can pull off this caliper together with the motor here, and we're just going to position it right like this. I'm going to take the motor off so that we can wind back the mechanism in the caliper manually. Now we just need to get a 5 millimeter Allen to remove these two hex bolts that mount the motor to the caliper, like so. We'll just set those out of the way and then carefully remove the electric parking brake motor. We'll just set this aside. Got a little bit of dust in there, but that's all right. Just try to clean that up. All right, now with that same 5 millimeter hex, just need to turn that clockwise until it stops. Now this is a delicate mechanism, so be careful when you're doing this. Don't use an impact. I'm just using a nice little small ratchet here. We're gonna turn that all the way in until it stops turning. That's how we'll know that it's all the way turned back in. There we go. Just turn that until it bottoms out, and that's done. So now, even before I take out these old pads, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the caliper back on in order to push this caliper piston back in. But before I do that, it's a good idea to pop the hood and make sure that you have enough room in your master cylinder so you're not gonna overflow that fluid when you push it back through. So let's pop the hood and go take a look. So here's our brake master cylinder, and you can see that we are pretty close to the max. It looks like maybe somebody has been topping off the fluid as the brakes have been wearing down. I still think we have enough room in here so that we can push the caliper pistons back in without this overflowing. If you do need to remove some brake fluid, you can use like a turkey baster or a little syringe to suck out some of that fluid. A lot of people ask me if you need to remove this cap when pushing the brake caliper piston back in, and you really don't. I really don't notice a difference in the resistance when taking that off or leaving it on. And really, the less you can expose the brake fluid to moisture, the better, because brake fluid will absorb moisture, even moisture in the air. It's hygroscopic, and that causes it to degrade and go bad. But it looks like we're good enough. We can push those caliper pistons back in and keep moving. Now here again, you can use a caliper compression tool. I'm on the road right now and I don't have one, so I'm just going to try to put the caliper back on and use a flathead screwdriver and see now that we have that turned back in, see if it will pry, and it looks like it is. We're in business. So this one is not threaded once you're able to turn that all the way back in. So now we can push it in just like normal with a flathead screwdriver. Just pull, and now the caliper piston is pressed all the way back in. I only did that method because I didn't have a caliper compression tool or even a C-clamp with me. So just with the screwdriver method, I was able to put this back on just for a minute with the old pads and take a look. We're all the way pushed back in, and this is ready to go. Now I'm also just gonna set this over here out of the way. I'm just going to carefully place that on the upper control arm, and just be careful of the electrical connector here, but I'm just going to set that caliper up here out of the way. Now we're not changing the rotors. The local parts store did not have them. This time we're just going to have to do pads only, and that's all right. So here I'm going to pull off these little V-springs first that push the pads outward. We'll set those out of the way. Doesn't look like our new kit comes with replacements, so we'll have to hang on to these. And then we can just pry the old pads out. Now we do have new hardware, so we're going to pry this off and put the new clips on. This is easier to do if you take this bracket off, but since I'm not changing the rotor, I'm not going to bother pulling this bracket off. All right, before I put the new clips in place, I'm going to clean this area. This little wire brush on a drill works really well for cleaning these up. So I'm going to clean this up and make sure that those new clips can seat in there properly. All right, then we're going to pull out the slide pins here. Just do these one at a time and just clean them. And we're also going to put some new grease on there. I'm just using this caliper grease here on the slide pins. Just give them a nice little coat, just so those don't get stuck. And you want to make sure you always use the right kind of grease here. That's good. We'll just pop that back in. When you pull that in, just make sure that you squeeze the boot to burp out any air that's trapped in there. And then we can do the top one as well. Just wipe that off. Sometimes I'll pop them back in. This one really isn't too bad, but we'll get some nice clean grease in there now. If you get too much grease, it doesn't compress, and so these will just push out and it'll cause your pads to drag. So you just make sure that when you do squeeze that boot that it doesn't keep pushing out. If it does, you use too much grease. These look good. Now here's where it's kind of tricky because I don't have the bracket off, but I'm going to use just a little bit of this grease here where those clips go. Just a really thin coat. Just make sure we don't get any of that on the rotor. If you do, just wipe it off. All right, and then we can put the new clips in place. Just line those up and press them down. Now this one has the little center part right here that sometimes gets stuck. So it's important that that does go all the way in. There we go. So these little center parts here, the trick that I've used is just shove a screwdriver in there. You really need that to seat flat. Otherwise, it'll cause your pads to drag, and when the rotor spins, it will catch on that little metal piece and it'll make noise. We managed to get it, but it just takes a little bit of effort here to push that center part in. Let's do the same thing here. I just usually jam a screwdriver in there, bend it a little bit, and that usually works to hold it in place. Sometimes I'll give the rotor a spin right now just to make sure we don't have any scratching, and it sounds good. So we should be good to go. All right, now when we put the new pads in, we just want to make sure that we match the orientation here. We just want to match the little noisemaker here, but just want to make sure that the orientation is the same. This one will be on the inside. Line that up and should just pop right in, like so. Same with the outside pad here. Press that in, and that is looking good. Now, just to keep the brakes quiet, I like to use this. Now, this is the Silicone Ceramic Extreme Brake Parts Lubricant. And what this does, this is really high temp stuff. So I usually put just a little bit of this on the outside of the shim, and that just seems to cut down on a little bit of the noise and vibration. Really doesn't take much, just a little bit here where the caliper is gonna make contact. All right, and then we can put in these little V-springs. Now, these are gonna push the pads outward, and so you do need to have one hand holding these or squeezing these together, which it's kind of tricky, but that's the only way that I know how to do it. These V-springs just go into the little holes at the edge of the pad, and we're gonna hold that on there while we reach over here and grab the caliper, and then just carefully position that caliper over those pads while you're squeezing them together, and should be able to pull in a little bit on those slide pins to get that to line up. No, I want to put the motor back on. Now I just realized I didn't put the motor back on. I'm going to do that first. Just going to position this right here upside down. Now these might push out onto the floor, or maybe I'll get lucky and they'll stay. Looks like they're going to stay, at least for a minute here. Now we need to put the motor back on, and so you can see this little groove shaft right here. It even has a little bit of grease there still. Let's just carefully put that on our caliper. Remember, this is kind of a delicate gear here, so just carefully line that up. There we go. And just presses on, and then we can put the little Allen head bolts in. I just want to get these started in there, and then we'll snug them with the ratchet, but really don't want to go too tight on this. Okay, now we're good. All right, now I'm gonna put the caliper down over the pads. You wanna also make sure that you don't twist the brake line. Make sure that you put it in the same orientation going back on. And we got lucky, those pads kind of stayed in place. They don't usually do that, but we got lucky. A lot of times those V-springs will push them out onto the floor, but those V-springs could also be kind of old, a little bit worn down, so they don't have as much pressure to push out, but the pads are not bound up or anything. They move in there freely like they should. We're good to put the caliper slide pin bolts in now. Just line those up and get them started. All right, and then we can just snug these down. You can see this slide pin spinning a little bit. Sometimes you need to get an open end wrench to prevent that from spinning too much. Now the torque spec on these caliper slide pin bolts is actually the same as the front. It's a range between 27 and 30 foot-pounds, and I'm just gonna go with 28. And then we can just plug the electronic parking brake motor back in. The simple click, just make sure that that does go together, and that's it. Now it's important before you start the car or before you head out, step on the brake pedal several times, which will push the caliper piston back out, pressing the pads up against the rotor where they need to be. Now when you do this, don't press the pedal all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in the master cylinder. Just press it down about halfway several times until it feels firm, and don't forget to double check the fluid level in your master cylinder, and you should be good to go. As far as the electronic parking brake adjustment, it's actually automatically adjusting. So the first time you put it on, it will automatically push itself out and you'll be all set. You don't have to reset anything in the car. It's automatic. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.